What you called rejection may not have been rejection in the way your heart experienced it, and that difference matters because it changes the story you tell yourself about your worth. When someone pulls away, goes cold, says they can't do this, or suddenly acts unsure, your mind wants to make it simple. It wants to label it as a verdict. They don't want me, I wasn't enough, I pushed too hard, I ruined it. Because a verdict at least gives you certainty. But avoidant behavior often isn't a verdict, it's a coping move. It's not always, I don't want you. It's often, I don't know how to stay present when this gets real. Avoidants typically don't fear connection in the beginning. They can enjoy chemistry. They can be playful. They can be consistent for a short window. They can even be vulnerable in moments, especially when the relationship still feels optional. Optional closeness feels safe because it doesn't threaten their autonomy. It doesn't demand emotional responsibility. It doesn't ask them to show up through discomfort. It doesn't force them to be seen over time. In the early stage, intimacy can feel like excitement, and excitement can be managed. But when the connection crosses into significance, when you become a real presence, when your needs are no longer hypothetical, when the relationship starts to imply a future, the nervous system shifts. This is where the end game begins for an avoidant. The end game isn't a wedding or a label. The end game is emotional permanence. It's the moment closeness stops being a fun experience and starts being a life reality. It's the moment you can't just disappear without consequences. It's the moment your choices begin to affect someone else deeply, and you have to carry that. For an avoidant nervous system, that moment can feel like entrapment even if no one is trapping them. It can feel like pressure even if no one is pressuring them. It can feel like losing control even if you've been calm and loving. So they create distance. And the distance feels like rejection to you because you experience love as consistency and closeness. When you love someone, you move toward them. So when they move away, it feels like a statement about you. But for an avoidant, moving away is often a statement about their internal alarm system. Their body is saying, too close, too real, too much responsibility. Find space. And space becomes their regulator. It brings their nervous system back down. It gives them the illusion of control again. This is why it can feel so confusing. Because they might still be attracted to you, still care, still miss you, and yet behave like they don't. They can feel warmth and fear at the same time. They can want the connection and dread what the connection requires. They can think you're special and still pull away because specialness raises the stakes. When you matter, they can't play the same games. When you matter, they have to risk being hurt. When you matter, they have to risk being seen. And that risk is exactly what their system has learned to avoid. This is also why avoidant rejection often comes with mixed messaging. They don't always say, I don't like you. They say, I'm confused. They say, I'm not ready. They say, I need space. They say, you deserve better. They say, I'm overwhelmed. They say, I don't know what I want. Those statements often sound like a person who is running from the weight of intimacy, not a person who has made a clean decision. And again, that doesn't mean you should wait for them or excuse them. It just means you're not dealing with a straightforward rejection. You're dealing with avoidance. When you understand it this way, you stop interpreting their withdrawal as proof that you are unlovable, and you start seeing it as proof that your presence triggered a level of closeness they weren't prepared to hold. That's why some avoidants pull away right when things are getting good, right when the bond is deepening, right when you think you're finally safe. The more real it becomes, the more their nervous system tries to regain safety through distance. And here's the most important truth inside this keynote. A coping move can still hurt you. A coping move can still be unfair. A coping move can still make them unavailable. Just because the rejection is coming from fear instead of indifference doesn't make it healthy. It doesn't make it your job to fix. It doesn't make it your responsibility to shrink your needs. But it does free you from the belief that you were rejected because you lacked value. Often you were rejected because you represented a kind of closeness that would require them to change. So if you've been sitting there thinking, how can someone run from something that was good? The answer is, because good can be terrifying to a person who is not trained to receive it. Good doesn't give them excuses. Good doesn't allow them to blame chaos. Good requires them to show up as an adult. And when someone has survived by withdrawing, showing up consistently feels like standing in a room with no exits. That's why your calm acceptance later becomes so powerful. Because once you realize it was a coping move, you stop chasing their fear as if it's a final verdict. You stop bargaining with their nervous system. You stop trying to prove you're safe enough to stay. You recognize what's happening. The connection crossed into endgame territory, and they use distance as their protection. Chasing after an avoidance rejection feels like love to you, because you're trying to save something you believed in. But to an avoidant nervous system, it often functions like a safety net that allows them to keep doing what they've always done, withdraw without consequence. That's why chasing doesn't usually bring closeness. It brings a temporary response followed by another retreat. Because your chasing is not being received as proof of connection. It's being received as proof that they can stay in control while you carry the emotional weight. When they pull away, your mind wants to repair. You want clarity because clarity calms your nervous system. You want to understand what changed because understanding gives you hope that you can fix it. You think if you choose the right words, if you show them how safe you are, if you reassure them enough, they'll relax and stay. And you may even be right that they feel something for you. But feeling is not the issue. Capacity is. And chasing is how you accidentally bypass the question of capacity. Because chasing fills the gap they created. It makes the distance not real for them. It turns their withdrawal into something you manage. It turns their inconsistency into something you compensate for. It turns their "I need space" into your project to prove you're low maintenance enough to deserve them. And the more you do that, the more the relationship becomes unbalanced. You become the one doing the emotional labor, and they become the one receiving it. That's the hidden danger. Chasing trains the dynamic. It teaches their nervous system that intimacy doesn't require their growth. It requires your flexibility. It teaches them that when they feel overwhelmed, they can retreat and you will soften the consequences. You will soothe, you will reach, you will reopen the door, you will make it easy. And every time you do, their coping strategy gets reinforced. Distance works. Withdrawal works. Avoidance works. They don't have to sit in discomfort long enough to develop a new skill, because your chasing gives them relief before growth is necessary. This is why many avoidants are prepared for the chase. They may not say it out loud, but it's familiar. They've seen it before. They expect the paragraphs, the tears, the "can we talk," the apology you don't even owe, the over-explaining. And the moment you do that, it gives them a story that protects them. They can label your love as pressure. They can label your needs as demands. They can tell themselves you're intense, clingy, too emotional, too much. Not because it's true, but because that story justifies their withdrawal and reduces their guilt. Your chasing becomes the evidence they use to make themselves feel right. It also keeps you emotionally available, which is the part that matters most to their nervous system. Even if they don't want closeness, they often want access. They want the option. They want the comfort of knowing you're still there. They want to be able to return without risk. Chasing gives them that comfort. It keeps your energy attached. It keeps you in orbit. And the more you orbit, the less they have to choose. Because choice requires consequence. Choice requires the possibility of loss. Choice requires them to feel what it would be like to not have you. Chasing removes that possibility. It tells them, no matter what you do, I'm still here. And again, you're not wrong for loving, but you're training them that your love is unconditional access, not conditional on respect and consistency. This is where you get stuck in the loop. They pull away. You chase, they return a little. You feel relief, you give more. They feel the closeness increase. Their fear triggers. They withdraw again. And every cycle teaches your nervous system to tolerate more uncertainty. You start living in tiny moments. You start craving small signs. You start reading tone like it's a code. You start losing your center, and you call it love because you've invested so much. But real love is not something you earn by enduring inconsistency. Real love does not require you to abandon yourself. Now here's the painful truth. Chasing can create a temporary spike in their attention. You might get a response. You might get a meet up. You might get a sweet message. But it's often not intimacy, it's regulation. It's them calming the discomfort of your pursuit, or calming the guilt, or calming the fear of losing you, without actually building the structure that would sustain closeness. And because there's no structure, it collapses again. This is why the second keynote matters so much. It reveals the difference between getting them back and being met. Getting them back can happen through anxiety, through chasing, through overgiving. Being met happens through standards and mutual effort. Chasing can pull them closer for a moment, but it often keeps them emotionally immature because it removes the need for accountability. So if you want the dynamic to change, you stop chasing the rejection like it's a problem you can solve. You stop bargaining with someone's capacity. You stop trying to be perfect enough to be chosen. You let their withdrawal be what it is, information. And you start choosing yourself in a way that forces reality to show up. Either they rise with clarity and consistency, or they remain in avoidance and lose access. Either way, you stop being the person who keeps the connection alive alone. When you accept an avoidance rejection calmly, you are not just stepping back, you are pulling the plug on the emotional system that made the rejection feel safe. That's why it creates such a twist. Because most avoidants are braced for pursuit. They expect you to argue your case, to demand explanations, to send one more message that tries to be understanding, to ask what you did wrong, to offer solutions to keep the thread alive. And when you do that, the rejection works exactly the way their nervous system needs it to work. It creates distance without consequence, relief without loss, control without responsibility. Calm acceptance breaks that, because suddenly the rejection doesn't buy them peace. It buys them uncertainty. And uncertainty is the one feeling their entire strategy is designed to avoid. Think about what rejection usually does in an avoidant dynamic. It creates separation, which calms them. It reduces intimacy, which removes pressure. It gives them their favorite thing, space. But the space only feels soothing when it still contains an invisible guarantee that you are still there, still attached, still accessible, still emotionally reachable. Even if they don't want to admit they depend on that, many do. Your attachment in the background becomes their emotional insurance policy. They can withdraw and still know they have a place to return to. Chasing is what provides that insurance. When you accept the rejection calmly, you cancel the policy. You don't scream, you don't blame, you don't punish, you don't even beg to be understood. You simply step back as if you believe them. You act as if their words have meaning. You remove yourself from the dynamic. And this is what shocks them, because it is so rare. Most people either chase or explode. Calm acceptance is unfamiliar. Calm acceptance communicates a message their nervous system cannot easily control. You don't get unlimited access to me. That message changes everything, because now their withdrawal has a cost. They didn't just create distance. They created a real possibility of losing you, and that possibility forces them into contact with vulnerability. This is where your calm acceptance becomes a psychological mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them without you saying a word. It says, "You chose distance, so I respected it." It says, "You chose uncertainty, so I chose clarity." It says, "You asked for space, so I gave you space without holding the door open with my pain." And because you didn't fight, they can't turn you into the villain. They can't say you were too much. They can't say you pressured them. They can't hide behind the story that your emotions were the problem. The spotlight goes back on them. And that's when the nervous system starts to loop. Because if you're not chasing, they don't have proof you're still attached. If you're not pleading, they don't have proof they still have influence. If you're not reacting, they don't have proof the door is still open. And for an avoidant, losing proof is destabilizing. They start to wonder what you're doing. They start to wonder if you meant it. They start to wonder if you've moved on. They start to feel the ego discomfort of no longer being the one in control of the dynamic. They start noticing your absence in the places where your effort used to live. They start replaying moments that they previously minimized. Not always because they're suddenly in love, but because the psychological environment has changed. You are no longer available in the same predictable way. That's why you'll often see a shift after calm acceptance. They become curious. They check your socials. They watch your stories. They reach out casually. They send a small message that feels innocent but carries a big purpose, to test if your acceptance was real. To test if you're still there. To test if they can reject you and still keep you. Because if they can still keep you, then their nervous system relaxes again. The rejection worked. The control returns. But if you don't rush, if you don't flood them with warmth the second they ping you, the uncertainty stays. And uncertainty forces a decision. It forces them to either step forward with clarity and accountability, or retreat and live with the consequence of losing access. Calm acceptance creates a fork in the road that chasing never creates. Chasing keeps the road the same, withdrawal followed by your pursuit, followed by their relief, followed by the next withdrawal. Now here is the most important truth in this keynote. The avoidant wanting you more after you accept rejection is not always a sign of love. It is often a sign that your availability was part of their emotional regulation. When you remove availability, they feel the gap. They feel the withdrawal. They feel the uncertainty. That's why they want to restore contact. And if you misunderstand this, you'll treat their reach out as proof they've changed, and you'll reopen the same cycle. So calm acceptance is powerful not because it manipulates them, but because it restores reality. It removes the reward of rejecting you while still receiving you. It makes their choices real. It forces them to meet you with maturity if they want access again. And at the same time, it protects you from losing yourself. Respect trying to earn what should be freely given. Consistent care. When you accept an avoidance rejection and truly step back, the reason they can start wanting you, even more, is not because you suddenly became magical. It's because you changed the emotional physics of the dynamic. You removed guaranteed access. You removed the safety net. And now your absence begins doing what your presence could not. It forces their mind to fill in the space. The human brain is wired to pay more attention to what it can't fully have, But an avoidant brain is especially sensitive to anything that threatens control. Your calm acceptance creates that threat, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. When you were still chasing, you were predictable. And predictable attachment feels safe to an avoidant, even if they complain about it. They know where you are emotionally. They know you'll respond. They know you'll care. They know you'll keep the door open. That predictability allows them to withdraw without fear of real loss. But the moment you accept rejection and detach, your predictability disappears. Now they don't know. Now they can't measure your attachment. Now they can't rely on your attention to stabilize them. And in that uncertainty, the mind starts doing what it always does when it loses control. It searches. Searching looks like curiosity. It looks like mental looping. It looks like replaying memories. It looks like, what if? It looks like checking your socials. It looks like wondering who you're with. It looks like imagining you moving on. And this is not just jealousy. It's the nervous system trying to map the environment again. They're trying to locate your emotional availability. They're trying to see if you're still an option. Because as long as you were chasing, you were an option that felt guaranteed. Now you feel like a door that might close. And this is where desire increases, because desire often rises in the presence of uncertainty. The mind values what it might lose. The mind focuses on what is incomplete. And your calm exit creates an unfinished story. You didn't argue. You didn't beg. You didn't create a dramatic ending they can blame on you. You just accepted it. That leaves them with no external chaos to focus on, and no easy narrative to hide behind. So their mind turns inward, and inward is where the questions lie. Another reason they can want you more is because your calm acceptance makes you look emotionally powerful. Not arrogant, powerful. You demonstrate that you can handle rejection without collapsing. You demonstrate that your self-worth is not dependent on their approval. You demonstrate that you won't barter your dignity for their attention. And that does something to an avoidant, because avoidants often respect what they can't control. They may not know how to meet it, but they feel it. Your detachment says, I can survive without you, and that threatens the part of them that believed you would always orbit around them. This is why ego discomfort shows up. Suddenly, they're no longer the chooser. Suddenly, you've chosen yourself. That shift flips the dynamic. It removes their position of power. And for many avoidants, power equals safety. When power shifts, their nervous system reacts. They might not call it fear, they might call it annoyance, curiosity, or checking in. But underneath is the same sensation. They no longer have the same influence. Then the emotional resurfacing starts, and this is the part people don't understand. When you stop chasing, you stop giving them constant reminders of what you feel. So their mind starts generating its own reminders. They remember your warmth. They remember your patience. They remember how you made them feel. They remember the moments where they were safe with you. And those memories now carry urgency, because the future is uncertain. It's easy to downplay someone when you think they'll always be there. It's harder to downplay them when you feel them slipping away. This is why they begin to watch. They become observers because observing is safer than participating. Watching gives them information without vulnerability. They can check your life without risking rejection. They can see if you're still available without admitting they care. They can look for signs without making themselves emotionally exposed. And your silence makes every small sign feel bigger. A post, a story, a quote, a new follower. Anything can become evidence that you're moving on. But here is the important distinction. This heightened interest is not automatically love. It's heightened attention. And attention can be driven by many things: attachment, anxiety, ego discomfort, fear of loss, nostalgia, even simple curiosity. So you don't judge the situation by the fact that they seem more interested. You judge it by what that interest produces. Because avoidants often want you more when you're unavailable, and want you less when you're close. They crave the idea of you when it's safe, and fear the reality of you when it's real. Your calm acceptance pushes you into the safe to desire zone for them, because now you're not asking for anything. You're not demanding closeness. You're not requiring accountability in that moment. You're simply gone quiet, and the mind can romanticize what it doesn't have to show up for. That's why you might see them come closer when you detach. And this is where your maturity matters. The goal is not to stay unavailable forever. The goal is to require a different level of behavior before you re-engage. Because if you respond to heightened interest by giving full access too quickly, you restore predictability, and predictability can lower their desire again. Not because you are less valuable, but because their nervous system returns to the old comfort of knowing they can pull away without losing you. So yes, uncertainty can increase their desire. But your job is not to chase desire. Your job is to require capacity. Your job is to let their increased interest become a bridge, only if they're willing to walk across it with clarity, accountability, and consistency. The moment they reach out after you accepted rejection is where your power either becomes permanent or gets handed back to them. And most people don't realize it, because that first message feels like the answer to the prayer. When you've been sitting in silence, when you've been fighting the urge to text, when you've been replaying everything, a simple, "hey," can hit like a drug. Your body relaxes, your mind lights up. You think, there it is, proof they care, proof I mattered, proof they're coming back. And that's exactly why this keynote is so dangerous, because the avoidance first reach out is often not a return to love, it's a test of access. Avoidants are not always trying to manipulate, but their nervous system is trying to regulate. When your absence creates discomfort, they look for the fastest way to reduce it. If they reach out and you respond warmly, quickly, fully, their system gets instant relief. The uncertainty is gone. The door is open. They can breathe again. They've restored control without having to face vulnerability. That's the hidden reward of the casual reach out. It soothes their anxiety without requiring accountability. And if you don't understand this, you will reward the wrong thing and recreate the same cycle with a new coat of paint. That's why the message is usually light. A meme, a random question, a check in that pretends nothing happened. Because if they start with, "I'm sorry," they have to acknowledge impact. If they start with, "I was wrong," they have to feel shame. If they start with, "I want you," they have to risk rejection. They don't want that exposure yet, so they knock softly. They try to re-enter your life through the smallest crack. They're checking one thing: are you still available to me? And if you answer that question too easily, the avoidant learns a brutal lesson: rejecting you has no cost. They can pull away, and you will hold the space. They can dismiss, and you will forgive. They can disappear, and you will accept. They can return casually, and you will reset everything. That lesson creates a revolving door relationship where the avoidant becomes more confident in their ability to leave and return, and you become more anxious and less grounded every time. It teaches you to be grateful for crumbs, and it teaches them to offer crumbs. This is also where intermittent reinforcement becomes your enemy, because the avoidant doesn't need to give you consistent love to keep you attached. They only need to give you unpredictable love. A good message here, a warm moment there, a sudden burst of attention after silence. Your brain learns to chase those moments like rewards. You start checking your phone, you start living for signs. You start thinking one good night means the whole story is changing. But that's not change, that's a dopamine loop. And the more you respond to crumbs, the more you confuse attention with effort. Attention is easy, effort is difficult. Attention is a text, effort is consistency. Attention is, "I miss you." Effort is, "I'm willing to talk about what happened and do it differently." Attention is a meme. Effort is making a plan and showing up. Attention is a late night check-in. Effort is staying present when intimacy requires responsibility. The trap is that avoidants can be very good at giving attention when they feel loss, because loss activates them. Your detachment triggers urgency, and urgency creates a burst of wanting. But wanting is not the same as capacity. Wanting is emotional. Capacity is behavioral. An avoidant can want you more the moment you stop chasing, and still be unable to treat you well once you return. So the trap is not that they reach out. The trap is the meaning you assign to the reach out, and the access you grant because of that meaning. If you treat their casual "hey" like a full return, you will rush into emotional availability. You'll start explaining yourself. You'll start sharing feelings. You'll start offering reassurance. You'll start being the warm, safe place again. And the avoidant's nervous system will settle. They'll feel relief. And once they feel relief, the same old fear returns, the fear of closeness, the fear of expectation, the fear of responsibility. Then they pull away again. But you are back in the same pain, just now with deeper disappointment, because you thought it was different. This is why the only safe way to respond is to change what you reward. You don't reward the ping. You reward the repair. You don't reward the test. You reward the truth. You don't reward nostalgia. You reward consistency. You don't reward urgency. You reward maturity. That doesn't mean you have to be cold. It means you stay anchored. You keep your energy measured. You respond politely, but you don't hand them your heart again. You let them do the work of re-entering with integrity. If they want access, they need to bring clarity. If they want a relationship, they need to address the pattern. If they want you, they need to show up in a way that doesn't require you to betray yourself. Because real love doesn't come back as a casual test. Real love comes back as accountability. Real love comes back as repair. Real love comes back with a plan, with consistency, with a willingness to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. And the trap exists to reveal one truth. Are they reaching out because they value you, or because they miss the comfort of being valued by you? If you don't reward crumbs, the answer becomes obvious. The final keynote is where you stop chasing the feeling of being wanted and start demanding the reality of being loved well, because that is the difference between desire and capacity, and it's the difference between repeating the cycle and ending it. Avoidance can want you intensely when you accept rejection, because your detachment triggers uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers urgency. But urgency is not love. Urgency is a nervous system response to potential loss. And if you confuse urgency with devotion, you will keep reopening the door every time they panic, and you will keep getting abandoned the moment they feel safe again. So the end game test is simple. Do they want you? Or can they hold you? Wanting you is easy. Wanting you is chemistry. Wanting you is missing you at night. Wanting you is sending a message when they feel lonely. Wanting you is thinking about you when you stop giving attention. Wanting you is reaching out when they sense you might be moving on. Wanting you can be intense and still selfish, because wanting you can be about the comfort you provide rather than the commitment they're capable of. Capacity is different. Capacity is what someone does when there is nothing to win. Capacity is what someone does after you respond. Capacity is what someone does when closeness becomes normal, when the urgency fades, when the relationship becomes a daily practice instead of a dramatic moment. Capacity is consistency. Capacity is communication even when it's uncomfortable. Capacity is being able to hear your needs without calling them pressure. Capacity is being able to repair after conflict instead of disappearing. Capacity is being able to stay present when their old instinct is to shut down. This is why avoidants often look their best right after you detach. Because detachment activates them. It wakes them up. It creates fear of loss. And fear of loss can temporarily make them more attentive, more affectionate, more present. But the endgame test asks a harder question. Can they stay that way when they have you again? Can they remain emotionally available when the relationship is no longer at risk? Can they keep showing up when you're not leaving? Because if their best behavior only appears when you're walking away, then their love is not stable, it's reactive. So you test capacity by requiring structure, not drama. Structure. You don't need to threaten. You don't need to punish. You simply move differently. You stop giving full access to someone who hasn't demonstrated consistency. You stop investing based on words. You start investing based on patterns. You stop being convinced by, I miss you. You start looking for, I'm willing to do something different. You stop believing promises. You start watching follow through. And the test shows up in moments that look small but are huge. Can they make a clear plan and keep it? Can they communicate when they're stressed instead of vanishing? Can they respond to your calm boundary without resentment? Can they have a difficult conversation without turning it into blame? Can they acknowledge the impact of their behavior without getting defensive? Can they stay emotionally steady for weeks, not hours? Can they show up in daylight, not just at midnight? Because desire often shows up at midnight. Capacity shows up in the morning. Desire shows up when they feel lonely. Capacity shows up when you need reliability. Desire shows up when they feel you slipping away. Capacity shows up when you're close and asking for consistency. And if you've been caught in avoidant patterns, your nervous system might be trained to chase desire because desire feels like proof. It feels like validation. It feels like winning. But desire without capacity is the most expensive kind of love because it charges you with confusion. It charges you with waiting. It charges you with overthinking. It charges you with making your needs smaller so they don't run. It charges you with becoming a version of yourself who is always monitoring the relationship instead of living your life. That's why the end game test isn't just about them. It's about you breaking your own addiction to uncertainty. Because sometimes what keeps you hooked is not their love, it's the intermittent hope. The unpredictable attention. The highs after the lows, the relief when they return. And the end game test asks you to stop accepting relief as love. Relief is what you feel when anxiety pauses. Love is what you feel when safety is consistent. So your standard becomes simple. If you want access to me, you bring consistency. If you want a relationship with me, you bring accountability. If you want closeness with me, you bring emotional responsibility. That standard doesn't need to be said as a threat. It needs to be lived as a reality. You don't chase someone into meeting it. You don't argue them into meeting it. You simply stop participating in anything that doesn't meet it. And this is where the paradox becomes your freedom. When you accept rejection, the avoidant may want you more. But the real win is not that they want you more. The real win is that you stop needing them to want you to feel worthy. You stop proving. You stop auditioning. You stop translating crumbs into hope. You start choosing a love that doesn't punish you for having needs. Because if they return with capacity, you'll see it. It will be calm, clear, consistent. You won't be guessing. You won't be decoding. You won't be anxious. And if they return without capacity, you'll see that too. It will be vague, inconsistent, emotionally convenient. And the endgame test will protect you from confusing the two. That is the power of accepting rejection. It doesn't guarantee they come back. It guarantees you don't lose yourself trying to make them stay.